You know by now that we're all about the journey. June's journey, that is. I feel this game was made for us specifically. It's the closest I've come to feeling like I've been dropped in the middle of a mystery novel set in the 1920s.
That's because you get to play as June, a globe-trotting flapper/amateur sleuth who lives to solve mysteries. You get to visit all sorts of fascinating places, from Paris to Cuba. You beat levels by identifying hidden objects in the scene. And we found that the more we play, the sharper our observational skills become.
The game is delightful, and a wonderful way to relax. I'll often pull my phone out and play it when I've got a free moment, like I'm on hold with an archive, or I'm waiting for a courthouse to open up in the morning. I'm currently on Chapter 16, meaning I'm searching for the son of June's housekeeper, who's on the run from New Orleans gamblers and the police. It's a wild time.
We know our audience is filled with folks who love a good mystery. Now is your chance to try your hand at being a sleuth yourself. Discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android. Content warning. This episode contains discussion of murder, sexual violence, and child sexual abuse materials.
On Friday, July 14th, 2023, Kevin and I were in Shelby County, Indiana, in the Shelbyville courthouse, actually, awaiting to go to a pretrial hearing in a murder case. And as we sat there in the lobby, sort of waiting for everything to get started, we were both on our phones. And so at some point, Kevin turned over to me and said, they just made an arrest in the Long Island serial killer case. And I just about fell off the bench right there. I, as some of you may know, am from New York originally, and I'm actually quite familiar with Long Island in particular. I have family out there. I've spent a lot of time out there. And that's always been one case as a result that has haunted me. I'm not super familiar with the Gilgo Beach area, but when it was revealed in the mid-2000s that a serial killer had been using that spot as a dumping ground, it was just a horrifying revelation, and I think it really stuck with people in the state, and frankly beyond that. It's attracted a lot of interest and press attention over the years, but for so long it seemed to basically be going nowhere. This unidentified serial killer had been allowed to do these horrific things to his victims, and there was no justice, there was no sense of anything happening in terms of an arrest being made. And so for me, this news was out of the blue and very exciting. So today what we're going to do is talk about some of the information that we've been able to gather so far on the investigation, on this new suspect who's been arrested, and about what could be happening going forward in this case. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Long Island Serial Killer, The Arrest. The document we're going to be mostly basing our discussion and analysis off of today is a bail application. This comes from the County Court of Suffolk County in the state of New York, and the case is, of course, the people of the state of New York against Rex Heuermann. This is the name of the suspect in the case. He has been arrested. He has been charged. We're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about him, and we're going to get into some of the facts of the case as has been revealed through this document. And keep in mind that this is a case that we're highly interested in and would like to cover going forward. So you can consider this the sort of first foray into the case to kind of get everyone up to speed, talk about what we know and also what we don't know.
I guess the first thing to note is that he entered a plea, and his plea was not guilty. And so then there is the question of what do we do with him while we are awaiting trial in future proceedings? In other words, is he kept in custody or is he let out on bail?
Would you like to read their reasoning for that, Kevin?
Based on the serious, heinous nature of these serial murders, the planning and forethought that went into these crimes, the strength of the people's case, the length of incarceration the defendant faces upon conviction, the extended period of time that this defendant was able to avoid apprehension, his recent searches for sadistic materials, child pornography, images of the victims and their relatives, counter-surveillance conducted online as to the criminal investigation, his use of fictitious names, burner email and cell phone accounts, and his access to and history of possessing firearms, the only means to ensure defendant Rex A. Heuermann's return to court is to remand him without bail.
So that is the state basically highlighting their case for why he should be kept in custody and not given bail. Before we get any further, I want to go into the background of this case, because I think it's super important for us all to understand what exactly underpins this case, how it became known in the public consciousness, how it got on the radar of police in the first place, some of the alleged missteps and problems with the investigation over the years. And then we can talk about Heuermann, because I think we really need that context going into it. So on May 1st, 2010, a young sex worker named Shannon Gilbert goes out to meet a client who she met on Craigslist at the gated community of Oak Beach in Long Island. And while she's out there, something happens. She flees her client's house in a panic and has interactions with her driver, who is also sort of there as her security. She won't go to him. She disappears as a result of this whole situation. But she does manage to make a 911 call. This is the event that essentially sets in motion the discovery of a whole series of really gruesome and upsetting crimes. While police are searching for Shannon Gilbert, they discover remains, but the remains are not that of Shannon Gilbert. So basically, since the summer of 2010, they're still looking for her. A police officer named John Malia and his canine partner, a dog named Blue, are looking. In December of that year, they kind of come back for a training exercise. They're continuing to look alongside Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach, which is, to be clear, in Suffolk County, New York, which is the eastern end of Long Island. For people who are trying to look on the map, it's on the eastern side of Long Island. The western side is Nassau County. So Blue and Malia are going out there, they're searching, and they identify human remains. And as I mentioned, it's not that of Gilbert, but another woman. The remains were of a young woman named Melissa Barthélemy. Suffolk County authorities would go on to find 3 more sets of human remains, and that's all within 1/4 mile. The other victims they discovered were Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. We'll get more into each woman and the circumstances of their disappearances and murders momentarily, but that gives you a sense of how this came up. I'll say now that other sets of remains have been linked to this series. We'll get more into that at the end. But for now, it's really important to note that Rex Heuermann has not been charged with every single case linked to the Long Island serial killer. He's only been charged with 3 counts of murder in the first degree and 3 counts of murder in the second degree for the following: the death of Melissa Barthélemy on or about July 10th, 2009, the death of Megan Waterman on or about June 6th, 2010, and the death of Amber Costello on or about September 2nd, 2010. Now, he's not been charged with the disappearance and murder of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, but in this bail filing, authorities say that he is absolutely the prime suspect in that case, and they also indicate that that murder is expected to be resolved soon. And here's why they're saying that. The evidence closely fits the modus operandi of the defendant in relation to the deaths of the other 3 women, and which supports the current charges. As such, this bail application contains descriptions of that evidence, which demonstrates the strength of the people's case as currently charged. Now, we'll get more into some of the other victims in this situation later, but that's what he's been charged with. Brainerd Barnes, Bartholomew, Waterman, and Costello are commonly referred to in this case as the Gilgo Beach Four. They were all found quite close to one another. So that's what makes them a cluster in this series. But this document actually even gets into more detail about why these 4 cases are so closely linked within this whole situation.
The investigations into these deaths were linked as, in addition to other factors, the victims each appeared to have been placed in close proximity to one another, 22 to 33 feet from the edge of the parkway. All were petite females, approximately 22 to 27 years old, believed to be working as sex workers. All had missing clothing and personal possessions. All had been killed by homicide. All had contact shortly before their disappearances with a person using a burner cell phone, i.e. cell phones without an associated verified identity. And the cell phones of 2 of the 4 victims, Brainerd Barnes and Bartholomew, were used by the killer after their deaths. In addition, each of the 4 victims were found similarly positioned, bound in a similar fashion by either belts or tape, with 3 of the victims found wrapped in a burlap-type material.
So let's get into a bit about the circumstances of each of these women's disappearance. The oldest case was that of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. She vanished on July 9th, 2007 from New York City. Now, like all of the other victims in the Gilgo Beach 4 case, she was thought to have been working as a sex worker at the time. In this document, investigators describe that she was contacted by somebody using a burner cell phone, and there proceeded to be 16 interactions between her phone and the burner phone. So investigators are basically describing the killer interacting with her and potentially luring her to her death. So on July 9th, this comes to an end. Brainerd Barnes' cell phone last has activity at 11:56 p.m. near the 59th Street Bridge in Manhattan. It goes dark for a number of days until July 12th. At that point, somebody gets into her cell phone, makes 2 outbound calls that are essentially to check her voicemail. And that happened on Long Island near the Long Island Expressway. So somebody has essentially taken her phone. It's gone from Manhattan to Long Island. We actually also learn a bit more about some of the issues regarding her cases that investigators ran into. One common theme in this document is investigators tracking where Heuermann's wife was at the times of these different killings. And they indicate that because they didn't get his wife's billing records in time, they missed out on the data for 2007. So they can't tell where she was based on that in 2007. And also, they missed out on getting cell site records for the burner cell phone that was used to contact Brainerd Barnes in 2007. Basically, those documents no longer exist. So for the oldest case, we're seeing there's kind of that suffers because they didn't get some of this information in time. That's not the case with the other 3 killings, however. But that can give you some indication of why they didn't necessarily have enough to charge him with the Brainerd Barnes slaying. Even, it's the oldest. They were missing some things. Perhaps things did not happen quickly enough for them to get the information they need now. So that's unfortunate, but there's a lot of other evidence. The next case that comes up is that of Melissa Bartholomew. That's July 3rd, 2009. Another burner phone gets in touch with her. Bartholomew and that person using the burner phone are in communication for a few days, and she's last seen alive on July 10th of 2009. And then here's where things get really horrifying. Her phone is taken by the killer. And on July 17th, July 23rd, August 5th, August 19th, and August 26th of that year, the killer uses his victim's cell phone to call her family members, including her teenage sister, and say horrific things about what he did to her and what happened, and alluding to the fact she was working as a sex worker. And that's always been one of those really chilling and sadistic aspects of the case for me, that not only did this perpetrator kill these women, but in some cases he was actively taunting their loved ones after the fact. The next case happened the following year. This is Megan Waterman. She was last seen at a Holiday Inn on June 6, 2010 in Hauppauge, New York. And that was 1:30 in the morning. She had been contacted by a burner cell phone that had just been activated the prior day, the documents indicate. And there's a lot of communication. She vanishes. Her phone indicated that it traveled to Massapequa Park, Long Island, which is going to become more important later. And she disappears. The last victim who Heuermann is charged with killing is Amber Costello. She was last seen alive September 2nd, 2010. This is a kind of a remarkable situation in her case because there are
actually a witness.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, this is a strange circumstance. A meeting is arranged between a client and a sex worker, but it's basically a trick that the sex worker is playing on the client. So the client shows up for this meeting expecting sex, but instead he is met there by someone who pretends to be the boyfriend of Amber Costello. And this person is outraged and furious. And so the client leaves, having already paid Amber Costello this money. And he ends up paying this money, obviously, for services that were not rendered. And so we get a description of this particular client.
How did this witness describe this client?
Large, white male, about 6'4" to 6'6", in his mid-40s, dark, bushy hair, and big, oval 1970s type eyeglasses. And actually used the word to describe him as looking like an ogre.
So there's a very distinctive description associated with the Costello slaying, because unfortunately this man came back.
Yeah, what happened?
The burner cell phone that had been in contact with Costello sent a text saying, "That was not nice, so do I, credit for next time." And what Amber ended up doing was she ended up meeting him, this time for real, this time not part of a ruse. And she left her cell phone behind, walked out of her residence, which was in West Babylon, New York, and she was never seen again. What's so important about that witness sighting is not just that the witness saw this person that Amber had been in contact with.
They also saw a vehicle.
Yes.
What vehicle did they see?
They saw a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. So why did that become important later? Well, basically, we get a sense of how exactly that reignited this investigation in one paragraph of this document. We are informed that in January of 2022, so pretty recently, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office assembled a very experienced team that contained, quote, investigators, analysts, and prosecutors. And they were partnered up with Suffolk County Police Department, New York State Police, Suffolk County Sheriff's Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So we're seeing this wide swath of expertise, different agencies working together. And this is what they say broke the case, essentially. A comprehensive review of every item of evidence and information in this investigation was undertaken by the team. On March 14th, 2022, approximately 2 months into the renewed joint investigation, this comprehensive review led to the discovery of a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche that was registered to defendant Rex A. Heuermann at the time of these murders. As described below, this was significant because a witness to the disappearance of Amber Costello identified a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche as the vehicle believed to have been driven by her killer. This discovery led to a comprehensive investigation of defendant Heuermann, which consisted of over 300 subpoenas, search warrants, and other legal processes to obtain evidence. Now, how exactly did they uncover information about the Avalanche that was registered to him? I don't know. They don't really go into what exactly that was, but basically they find, hey, we're seeing this car, and then that car is the same type of car mentioned by this witness, and oh look, the guy it's registered to is a huge dude, and
meets the physical
description. Yeah.
Let's look at his burner phones.
Let's look at his burner phones. Let's look at his creepy Gmail accounts. So this is a situation where I think people sometimes are like, why didn't this get solved immediately? But I think sometimes it just takes another set of eyes, potentially. We've seen that happen in other cases. I mean, we've reported in Delphi that it was not a situation where the investigators were playing the long game for a long time. Our reporting indicates that Richard Allen came up rather suddenly in October of 2022. Well, in this case, they basically said, we need to go over all of this again. We're not getting anywhere. Let's sit down and look at everything again. And guess what? That led to results in this case. And when you're looking for a nameless, faceless killer, it's an enormous undertaking. But when you can find the name and then things are starting to stack up and look good for the person that you're looking at, that makes it just that much easier to do the investigation you need to actually close the case. So it seems like finding that Avalanche, finding that name, and then saying everything fits with this guy, and then looking closely and getting the records.
That was the breakthrough.
We've talked a lot about how great HelloFresh is when it comes to meals. They really want you to have it all, free time and delicious food. That's why they take care of all the meal planning and even ship the ingredients right to your door, so you've got everything you need to make a wonderful meal for yourself and your family. But let's chat a moment about a side of HelloFresh we didn't know about ourselves until very recently.
I'll be honest, I don't just eat at meal times. During the day or when I'm relaxing in the evening, I like to munch on snacks or sides. And I assumed that was something HelloFresh could not help me with. So I would still have to trudge out to the grocery store and stand in line to get those sorts of treats. But I was wrong.
Let me tell you about HelloFresh Market. It lets you shop online and take your pick from a curated selection of over 100 items, including all sorts of tasty treats and desserts. And it will all be added to your weekly HelloFresh delivery. It's the best of meal kits and online grocery shopping combined in one weekly box.
This is another great reason to try out HelloFresh. And remember, Murder Sheet listeners get a special discount.
Go to HelloFresh.com/MSheet50 and use code MSheet50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/MSheet50 and use code MSheet50 for 50% off plus free shipping. Try out America's #1 meal kit today. We are so delighted to work with our sponsor, Brilliant Earth. This is a company that offers some of the most brilliant and romantic engagement rings and wedding bands out there, all the while ensuring a commitment to ethical sourcing and sustainability.
If you're looking to get married or to become engaged, or even if you're just searching for a special piece of fine jewelry, you have to check out their website. They make browsing so easy.
They even let you design your own perfect engagement ring, or you can shop by style. I love the delicate willow rings, along with the 3-stone Nadia rings and the classic freesia rings. It's so hard to choose.
And you don't have to worry about the ethical implications of your purchase. Your special gift, your engagement ring, your wedding band should never be tarnished by the idea that the gems or materials came from an abusive system.
See, Brilliant Earth has a commitment to beyond conflict-free diamonds. That means one thing. They only accept diamonds from mining operations in countries that strictly follow international labor, trade, and environmental standards. Fewer than 1% of other diamond suppliers meet Brilliant Earth standards.
You can feel good about your purchase, knowing that you're supporting a brand that actually cares about its ethical impact and is committed to fostering better standards in the jewelry business.
Check out all of their beautiful pieces at brilliantearth.com. That's brilliantearth.com.
So who is this guy? Who is Rex A. Heuermann? Well, we've got a good idea of his physical description. The filing itself describes him. He's a large white male, approximately 6'4", weighs over 240 pounds, dark bushy hair. He wears large eyeglasses. He was 46 years old when Amber Costello went missing. The filing mentions some of those specific details, of course, to highlight the fact that this guy fits the eyewitness description that we referred to before. He got married to a woman back in September of 1990. The wedding announcement mentions that he graduated from Berner High School in Massapequa, Long Island, and that he was working on getting a bachelor's in architectural technology from the New York Institute of Technology. He was actually interning with an architectural firm at the time. He's currently married to wife number 2, who is a native of Iceland. She immigrated to this country as a child, and she attended Farmingdale High School in Nassau County. He now has his own firm. His daughter works there with him. According to the New York Times, Heuermann also has a son. We don't know much about the son. Back in 2007, the New York Daily News had a story about some professional problems that Heuermann was going through. The New York City Building Department had investigated whether he had potentially falsely identified an apartment building in Harlem as vacant. Heuermann had been hired to renovate the structure. He did not return calls for comment at that time. But what was this guy like in his personal life?
So Audrey Conklin, who is a terrific reporter for Fox News, and her colleague Michael Ruiz have done some pretty great exclusive reporting on Heuermann recently. They interviewed neighbors who basically described him as the neighborhood creep. Now, let's get into where he lived at the time of the murders and now. This is a village called Massapequa Park. Okay, it's in Nassau County in Long Island. I'm actually pretty familiar with this because I have family, again, living in Nassau County. And Massapequa Park is, by all accounts, a pretty nice community. I know, talking with my family about it, there's a lot of police that live there, firefighters. It's kind of a middle-class, nice town. And basically what Conklin and other reporters have kind of pieced together is that Heuermann was a bit of a recluse. His house, despite the fact that he was an architect, was like very run down and cluttered, and he and his family kept to themselves. Obviously, there's no crime in that, and I'm not trying to indicate that like the neighbors should have known that he was a serial killer, because you can have a rundown house and be, reclusive and not be doing crimes. But basically people are saying like this is not a situation where he was like a pillar of his community and pals with everybody. There was something off there. There was something off. The New York Times even reported that local cashiers remembered his family as paying for their food with food stamps. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but they did notice that that was somewhat unusual given their address. It's not an area where that, tends to be a common thing. So basically, there's stuff here to indicate kind of a sort of strange situation with his family's presence in Massapequa Park. It seems like they attracted notice, not in a good way. People described his wife as seeming very depressed and quiet, standoffish. He's not around, or if he's around, he's also reclusive. It's just a strange situation all around, it seems like, as far as people who lived near him were concerned. None of that rises to the level of let's report him for being a serial killer, because again, that's just, there's no crime in being a kind of weird neighbor. But I will say there is some strange information about his brother, Craig Heuermann, who now lives in South Carolina. Reporting for Fox News, Conklin uncovered that his brother, who is also from Massapequa, now lives in a remote property in rural South Carolina. His property has signs on the fence saying no warrant, no entry. A neighbor claimed that this man, Craig Heuermann, hit him in the head with a steel pole over some sort of property dispute. And we do know that the South Carolina Chester County's Sheriff's Office is now working with the Gilgo Beach Task Force to possibly process some sort of vehicle associated with this. So that's interesting. The only other thing about Craig Heuermann that comes out is that on February 26th, 1988, he was driving a car on the Southern State Parkway in Long Island when he sped over the median and crashed into a car driven by 51-year-old New York City Housing Authority police captain Winian Buskey. Buskey had been driving to meet some colleagues at a bowling alley for some fun bowling. Unfortunately, he died, and Craig Heuermann was charged with driving while intoxicated. It's not really clear what became of that case. I tried to look it up on New York's court portal, but, that does, indicate that there was some history with this family, locally at least. So now why don't we get into one of the pieces of evidence that's sort of like the bulk of this case against Heuermann, at least as described at this time. And that is, of course, the phone records. And we're not just talking about records for Heuermann's own cell phone. We're talking about the number of burner phones, which he used, according to the investigators, to get away with his crimes and facilitate his crimes and contact sex workers, and in some cases, murder said sex workers.
During the times of the disappearances and murders of the victims, defendant Heuermann owned an architectural business located in Midtown Manhattan, and this business was the named subscriber of Heuermann's cell phone, which was active during the times of the victims' disappearances and subscribed to Heuermann's home address in Massapequa Park. Although cell site records from that time period no longer existed, investigators obtained cellular billing records which showed general location information for Heuermann's cell phone. A review of those records, as well as Heuermann's American Express records, showed numerous instances where Heuermann was located in the same general locations as the burner cell phones used to contact victims Barthélemy, Waterman, and Costello, as well as the use of Brainerd Barnes and Barthélemy's cell phones when they were used to check voicemail and make taunting phone calls after the women disappeared. Significantly, investigators could find no instance where Heuermann was in a separate location from these other cell phones when such a communication event occurred.
So what does this mean? Well, basically, investigators are using these cell phones to track Heuermann and put him in the same location as either the burner phones used to lure these sex workers or the sex workers' cell phones themselves. So it's not a matter of just tracking him via his own phone. It's saying, hey, your phone is in the same place as their phones, and they're traveling together in some cases. They're pinging off the same towers. It's not so much as pinpointing it, because I think what they're indicating with some of these records is that's not super possible. It's just more of providing approximate locations. But it's saying, like, why is your phone and these burner phones and the sex workers' phones constantly in the same area whenever anything is happening? So it's like, I think just looking at it, maybe trying to think of the defense's perspective, it's not as conclusive as like putting it in his hand, but it's more of stacking up the evidence against him and saying, like, every time we see some activity with the killer's burner phone and the, these missing women's phones, you're in the mix here. And why does that keep happening? So I think that's what's more compelling than necessarily the sheer amount of evidence in that regard, as opposed to it being super specific and like locked down to a specific location. That makes sense?
That makes perfect sense.
And here's a good example. They talked about Barthélemy's phone. So they found that on July 10th, 2009, the last day she's seen alive, the burner phone that was arranging services with Barthélemy and Heuermann's phone are around Massapequa. Together, they go to New York City that day, both of them. Then Barthélemy's phone and Heuermann's phone together go back to Massapequa. 4 days later, around 7:15 p.m., the burner phone that was used to reach out to Barthélemy goes to Manhattan. Heuermann's cell phone also goes to Manhattan at the same time. On July 17th, 2009, at 12:40 p.m., a man called Barthélemy's family on her cell. It pings off the cell tower at 4 Penn Plaza, and that's 0.45 miles from where Heuermann's office is. And Heuermann's cell phone also has a call location in that area around that time. So it's just triangulating him. Like, you keep popping up here. When he goes to Iceland that year, that's his wife's home country. There's a vacation. He leaves August 10th, comes back August 18th. In between there, all activity on Barthélemy's cell phone completely stops. When he's back, it resumes.
Yeah, that seems pretty telling.
Yes.
What is there in the nature of online evidence?
The online evidence is actually closely tied to the burner phones because there's basically accounts that are linked with different burner phones as he's setting those up. And some of it is pretty disturbing. So Google Pay payments that the investigators obtained indicate that he's paying for the Tinder dating app. He's using a fake name, his middle name Andrew or Andy, and he's got the email address springfieldman9@aol.com. He has an alias John Springfield of Astoria, Queens, and he also logged into that on his real cell phone. Also, that account has a selfie of him in it that they actually print in the document. So, I mean, it's pretty conclusively him. They also find burner phone records from 2021 to 2022 indicating that he's still calling up sex workers. He's still calling up massage parlors. These burner phones are constantly hitting on the cell towers from Massapequa Park, where his residence is, and New York City, where his office is. Some of the most disturbing information came from another burner email he set up, which they called the T Hawk email account. The alias was Thomas Hawk, and it's thawk080672@gmail.com. And we're going to read out some of the search terms that he used on this one, which also is linked to another burner phone. And I just want to say, these are really disturbing. If you don't want to hear some of these really upsetting search terms, I would recommend jumping forward 2 minutes. So this phone was used to conduct thousands of searches related to sex workers, sadistic torture-related pornography, and child pornography, including Mistress Long Island, Mature Escorts Manhattan, Girl Begging for Rape Porn, Teen Girl Begging for Rape Porn, Pretty Girl with Bruised Face Porn, Torture Redhead Porn, 10-year-old Schoolgirl, Hentai Plump Pussy Lips Cut Off Porn, Skinny Redhead Tied Up Porn, Short Fat Girl Tied Up Porn, Tied Up and Raped Porn, Asian Twink Tied Up Porn, Tied Slaved Force-Fed Cock, Cum Shot and Crying Porn, Girl Hog-Tied Torture Porn, 10-year-old Blonde Hair Girl, Chubby 10-year-old Girl, Black Girl 10 years old, Girl with Face Beat Up, Chubby 10-year-old Girl Crying, 13-year-old Schoolgirl, Age 12 Child Girl with Blonde Hair and Blue Eyes, Blonde Hair Girl, Young Depressed, Teen Girl Oiled Bodies, Preteen Girl with Makeup, Nude Slave Girls, Old Janitor's Gangbang Little Schoolgirl, Crying Girl Painful Anal, Schoolgirl, Crying Teen Porn.
So those searches obviously show an interest in sexualizing the suffering of females.
And including young girls.
There are more searches. These searches are more explicitly linked to the crimes with which he is charged. These searches or articles accessed include, but are not limited to: 1. Why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer? 2. Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? 3. Long Island killer. 4. Long Island serial killer phone call. 5. Long Island serial killer update. 6. Long Island serial killer update 2022. 7. FBI active serial killers. 8. Serial killers by state 2023. 9. Map of all known serial killers. 10. Unsolved serial killer cases. 11. America's 5 most notorious old cases. 12. 11 currently active serial killers. 13. 8 terrifying active serial killers we can't find. 14. John Bitroff. 15. Megan Waterman. 16. Melissa Barthelemy. 17. Maureen Brainerd Barnes. 18. Redacted. Name of relative of Melissa Barthelemy. 19. Redacted. Name of relative of Megan Waterman. 20. Cops launch Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force. 21. Mapping the Long Island murder victims. 22. Inside the Long Island serial killer and Gilgo Beach. 23. The Gilgo Beach Killer. Criminal Minds. 24. In Long Island serial killer investigation, new phone technology may be key to break-in case.
So what do you make of all that?
He's a person interested in sexual violence. He's a person very, very interested in the particular series of crimes he would later be charged with.
Yes. And I think we can all agree, if you're listening to this show, and certainly Kevin and I as people who put together this show, we might be looking up different information about a case. And that alone is not necessarily super concerning. I think we've all probably had late nights where we couldn't sleep and just started looking up serial killer cases. And if we were ever arrested, then that would be maybe concerning, but it's by itself not important. What really intrigues me about it, though, is that he's almost like the person searching this isn't just looking for information on the Long Island serial killer. They're actually kind of trying to figure out, like, why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Which, if you're interested in the case, I think is a reasonable question. But given the context of what he's been accused of, it kind of takes on a new veneer of possibly wanting to see, like, am I in trouble? Like, is there, are they getting close? So obviously that's, from a defense attorney's perspective, that's something that you could brush away pretty easily. But at the same time, from a prosecutor's perspective, that's concerning. To me, the really horrific stuff is the pornography he was looking up, because it was specifically young preteen girls and very violent torture of women. And that's, given what he's accused of doing to these sex workers, that's pretty horrifying to me. Before we move on to DNA, I will say that the T-Hawk email account, they found searches for podcasts, documentaries, different things regarding the Long Island serial killer investigation, and hundreds of image searches for murder victims, members of their immediate families. So that's concerning as well, given the context. Significantly, defendant Heuermann also searched for and viewed articles concerning the very task force that was investigating him. The links that they screenshotted in the filing were the following from Timothy Bolger from the Long Island Press on February 15th, 2022. The headline was "Cops Launch Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force." And then on February 16th from Gina Tron for Oxygen, "This case is solvable. New task force aims to solve Long Island serial killer case." The last fake account they really get into is hunter1903a3@gmail.com. That was used to send back and forth a picture of a sex worker, and basically investigators also tracked visits to the site gilgonews.com. That's from the Suffolk County Police Department. They would post news on the investigation. His home IP address pings off of that in May and July of 2020. So he's looking at these updates.
So tell us about what DNA and forensic evidence they have.
Between the bindings and the burlap found with these 4 victims, There were a number of instances where actually human hair that did not belong to the victims was found. Specifically, a female hair on Brainerd Barnes, 2 female hairs on Waterman, and a female hair on Costello. They found female hair not belonging to any of the victims on each one of these women. And as DNA techniques got more advanced, they were able to do more with that. So the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory contacts an outside forensic laboratory known in this filing as Forensic Laboratory Number 1, and that lab had the ability to apply DNA techniques and direct genome sequencing. So in July 2022,
they were able to identify who these hairs belong to.
Or at the very least, narrow in on it very significantly.
Who did those hairs belong to?
They found that the hairs were not inconsistent with Rex Heuermann's wife. Now, I don't want to overstate it because they really said the hairs belonged to a female individual in mitochondrial haplogroup K1C2. So it's not the victims. It's a person in that haplogroup. In addition to that, they also get help from a second forensic laboratory that does more forensic mitochondrial analysis. And they're saying that over 99% of the North American population can be excluded from these hairs, but Heuermann's wife cannot be, and she's also a member of that haplogroup. So they're narrowing it very significantly on her. I know in forensics they don't want to overstate things because then you get into trouble scientifically, but they can narrow things and say, well, it's very unlikely that this belongs to anyone who is not either you or a direct relation of you. So for the purposes of an investigation, that's pretty compelling, even if they're not supposed to say scientifically it's a match, if that makes sense.
There's also a male hair.
Yeah, tell us about that.
So they found a male hair from the burlap on Megan Waterman. Couldn't do DNA testing at the time, but technology improved. And so actually back in January, they recovered a pizza box that Heuermann had tossed outside. And they got some of his DNA off the pizza crust. And they used that information to identify that the hair they recovered from the burlap around Waterman was most likely a hair belonging to Heuermann.
So on July 13th, 2023, Suffolk County police officers arrested Heuermann, and he actually had some of his burner phones on him. They've been searching his house. He was arraigned and pled not guilty on July 14th. His next appearance in court is going to be August 1st, 2023. The media around this has been obviously intense. There's been a lot of digging into his past, into who he was, what he was like, and we'll certainly be interested in following this case going forward as it makes its way through court. But I think it's really important to emphasize a few things he's not charged with. This is an investigation that really focuses on the Gilgo Beach 4. We mentioned Shannon Gilbert before. Authorities have not even indicated at this time if they feel her case is a murder. So I think that's not something that he's being tied to right now. He's also not being tied to the murders of a number of other sex workers who came up in the investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders. Now, this is where it gets complicated. These remains were not found as close to the Gilgo Beach 4. But it's not too far out of the ballpark, and they also are, in some cases, confirmed sex workers, in other cases, possible sex workers, and in some of these cases, their remains are found in different places in Long Island. So it's like, here's where we get into the confusing possibility. Could there be another separate serial killer at play here? Or will these eventually be also tied to Heuermann? We don't know. I'll go briefly into some of those cases so you can get the context. In spring of 2011, more bodies were found beyond the Gilgo 4. So one was Valerie Mack, also known as Melissa Taylor. She was from Philadelphia. She was a sex worker. In 2000, she disappeared. Body parts of hers were found in Manorville, New York, but she was not identified until 2020. Jessica Taylor, another sex worker, disappeared in 2003. Partial remains were found in Manorville. Then there were a couple of unidentified sets of remains. Jane Doe number 3, also known as Peaches. Her torso was found at Hempstead Lake State Park in Lakeview, New York. It had a tattoo of a heart-shaped peach with a bite out of it. This was actually a young African-American woman. The other victims we've mentioned so far have been Caucasian women. And further skeletal remains of hers were found in a plastic bag in 2011 in Jones Beach State Park. Tragically, I mean, this is just such a disturbing aspect of it, but remains of a toddler girl who were identified through DNA as the daughter of Peaches were also found. So that's a really upsetting and horrifying situation there. In addition to that, the remains of a young Asian male who was found with women's clothing, possibly indicating that this was actually a transgender woman, were found, as well as a Jane Doe number 7, who is known as the Fire Island Jane Doe. So some of those additional remains were found not too far away from Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach off the Parkway, about 2 miles from the first 4 sets of remains. So it's not that far away, but it's also, it leads to questions. And of course, I mean, one of the searches that Heuermann is accused of doing was for John Bitroff. That's another serial killer who was active on Long Island and was targeting sex workers. Some people have speculated over the years that he was actually responsible for the Gilgo Beach slayings. But of course, now obviously they have a different suspect. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think based on the limited information we have about some of these cases? Do you think there's a possibility that there's a second serial killer, or do you think that investigators are going to ultimately try to make this all fit together?
There's so little information out there that it's almost impossible to speculate. I'll be very interested as what information continues to come out through the course of this investigation into Heuermann and in the court proceedings against him.
To me, I go back and forth. I'm willing to speculate a little bit more, but the Gilgo Beach 4, they all are petite Caucasian women who are working as sex workers, and there's some signatures, there's burlap, there's bindings. So all of that definitely fits together. Some of these other victims, they happen a lot earlier. The remains are disposed in different ways, with certain body parts turning up here or there. There are people of color who are victims in the second group, an Asian male or possibly transgender woman, a black young woman and her daughter. So I don't know. I guess it kind of gets into, with serial killers, people make a really big deal about modus operandi and profiling. I tend to think that in life, you know, things are not always as clean cut as they are in a textbook. So maybe a serial killer strays from their typical path or starts out doing one thing and then graduates to something more specific. But I agree with you. It's too early to say. And I don't know. It's possible that if an area is remote enough that maybe it would attract more than one person as far as the dumping ground goes.
We just have to follow future developments.
Absolutely. I guess one concern will be that if there gets into a situation like I've referenced the Atlanta child killings. That was a horrific case in the 80s. All these young African-American children are going missing and turning up murdered in Atlanta. And ultimately, a man named Wayne Williams is charged with the murders of 2 young adults that are associated with that series. And he's convicted. But no one's ever charged in the case of the young boys who were killed. And in some case, girls. And it's one of those cases where were all of them linked? Were some of them done by someone? People remain questioning what happened with that. So I think that's a situation you don't want to get into, that because it just leaves a community without answers. And it leaves certain family members without answers too. So I would say that we're going to be covering this in terms of court developments and what's going to happen next. One thing that I would recommend that everybody read if they're interested in this case is Lost Girls by Robert Kolker. It's a very good book. I really liked it because it really got into the women who were murdered in this case. It was written before Rex Heuermann's name ever came up on the radar. So it's not going to be getting that much into the investigation here, but it really humanizes the victims and indicates some of the struggles that they went through that maybe led them into the situation they found themselves in before they were murdered. It's very humanizing. It's very empathetic. And I really would strongly encourage people to read it because I think it really kind of shines a light on these women in a way that they absolutely deserve and spotlights some of the agony that their families went through as a result of this horrific set of killings.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
I want to take a moment here to say thanks again to Brilliant Earth. I think in this day and age, it's always difficult to find a company that delivers fine quality products while still maintaining high ethical standards. And that's especially hard to find in the jewelry business. But Brilliant Earth is that company.
Absolutely. They have actually trademarked their Beyond Conflict-Free guarantee. That essentially means that they're going above and beyond to ensure that their diamonds are ethically sourced. They offer a wide range of different natural diamonds as well as lab diamonds. But you can rest assured that these are going to be coming from operators in countries that are maintaining global standards when it comes to labor and environmental practices. So you won't have your special ring, your engagement ring, your wedding band be tainted with this idea that it came from an unethical and problematic situation. It's a real load off of your mind as a consumer, because even try as we might, it's often hard to kind of maintain those best practices in your own life when you're shopping for products. So this is a brand that does the work for you in that.
And you can visit their website. They have a terrific selection of quality merchandise.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that it's not just diamond engagement rings and wedding bands. They have jewelry for men. They have religious jewelry. They have tennis bracelets that are super cute. I love their willow rings because they're kind of like have a naturey vibe. And I mean, I don't consider myself like a hippie or anything, but I vibe with those. I think they were really pretty. I also like their Frisia diamond rings. Those are more of like the classic engagement ring you think of when you think of engagement rings. And so I just think there's something for everybody. I think you can go in there and look at some of their beautiful offerings, but you could actually go and design your own ring to ensure that you're getting the perfect thing that just matches your personality, makes a statement, and, you know, tells people a bit about, you know, what you like, what your tastes are, and how you are as a person. So if you're looking for an engagement ring, if you're looking for a wedding band, if you're just looking for a gift for someone that you care about who loves jewelry, visit brilliantearth.com. They've got a great selection. Check it out. And you really can't go wrong with that.
And again, that's brilliantearth.com.